All right, team. I am very much out of my element doing this video via Zoom. They evidently changed the Google Meet function, so it's really quite a mess. But I cannot do this lesson without talking to you. And chances are, when you're watching this video, I will either be in the hospital or out of the hospital with my gallbladder surgery. Yay. So my apologies that this is not ideal, but we gotta do what we gotta do. And that includes continuing your learning. So I'm assuming that everything has gone well. My hand just seems to come out of nowhere. I'm assuming that we're all doing well, that yesterday you guys read the poem Mary at the Tattoo Shop, or maybe 2 days ago, and then you tried to identify some of the main ideas on your own. I want to take a minute and do the kind of the same thing for you, where I go over some of the more important things that I hope that you identified from that poem, because spoiler alert, you guys are going to be doing this with new poems. So just as a quick recap, you don't need to see this scene, but this poem, Mary at the Tattoo Shop, I think it's a really great starting poem because, first of all, it's written very much like sentences, right? And when you were hopefully going through your notes and on the blank document, when you were kind of toggling back and forth between the poem and the article, that sort of gave you a sense of things to look for. When you went to word order, you probably notice that like everything seems like a normal sentence, like subject verb agreement, and that's ultimately what you're going for. So you hopefully, like I said, went through this on your own. So I want to kind of go through the answer key, if we want to say it that way. I totally do not believe that there's only one way to interpret a poem. I don't. But over time, these are sort of the things that I would say that as a collective we'd agreed upon. So you've heard me say this before, but you don't want to take the narrator and assume that the author and the narrator are independent or are interchangeable. So the author of this poem, Marcus Jackson, we kind of make the assumption, right, with a name like Marcus, that he's probably male, and the author probably is. But I will say that the narrator, we don't want to assume that, right? We want to look for evidence in the text that either proves it one way or not, but we can't make that assumption. So from the title is called Mary at the Tattoo Shop. What to me is interesting is that Mary's not the narrator of this. So the author is clearly putting Mary as the center, and that really does inform the rest of the poem. You get a sense the entire time that she is the focus of the narrator. So really, again, Mary at the Tattoo Shop, it's a very telling title. We talk about showing versus telling. This one is hugely telling. So when we move down to the keywords, diction, register, and tone, some of these are some notes that, like I said, I've compiled over the semesters. And if you want to go back and kind of add in a couple things to your own notes, or hopefully if you were like, well, you don't have no idea what to put, this sort of clears it up. Because with the poem that you're going to choose, you're going to do the same thing. So like for the title, I want you to think about what is important or critical about the title. So in terms of keywords, the keywords relate to diction, which is word choice, register, and tone. So the word underage comes up, and I think that you could argue that it's by just using it, it establishes the sense of like individualism and rebellion, right? Like they say that they're both 14 years old, come right out. The narrator says that. Someone made a comment to a student, and I think this is true, like getting a tattoo of your own name is a little bit basic, right? But if you're 14, you are still at that point where basic things are interesting. No offense to anyone that's young, but I think that to get layers and depth, that sort of takes time and growth for a lot of people. So the fact that she's getting this on herself, one of my students made the comment, she is what's important to her. And I think that that's probably a fair thing. the word anxious comes up, and this was definitely personification where they say avenue beside us anxious, but that anxiousness, right? I think we can get a little bit of that there, especially the narrator seems to be, like this is new. The language is overall straightforward and casual. We talked about word order. It's pretty common, like subject, verb. There aren't any periods in this, but you pretty much could put periods in there and have complete sentences. So figurative language and imagery, you guys can kind of like look at this list, but there are a ton of different things. Like the sun handing the sky over tonight, is certainly personification. I think it's interesting where they talk about the tattoo gun buzzing as if trying to get free. You've got personification there. You could even argue that the sound buzz, right, is what the tattoo gun makes. So I feel that this is such a great example for, even though it's simple, in terms of understanding, the author includes such fantastic figurative language and imagery that it really does bring us a closeness to both the narrator and the subject area. So meter and rhyme. We could, if you've ever taken AP, you could probably come up with an exhaustive list of like, all the different types of meters. And even the article I gave you lists like certain metric foots, and we probably all know iambic pentameter as what Shakespeare wrote, which was 10 syllables, emphasized, unemphasized. But in this poem, meter isn't really critical to it. And that's kind of something that you'll notice as you're going through and analyzing poems, and then also hopefully writing some. If the meter is something that you want to emphasize, you can, but it's certainly not necessary, just like rhyme. When you are really committed to rhyme and meter, it makes it a little bit more difficult with your word choices and selections because you're limited to only what fits. So in this poem, there is no concrete rhyme or meter. We could go through and count the syllables and mark the, unstressed, stressed, but in reality, it doesn't make a difference in terms of the meaning. So I would say that the relationship between the speaker and the addressee is a little bit controversial. I am firmly in camp. The narrator has a crush on Mary. I'm firmly in that camp. But some people argue that they're just friends. And I think that you could kind of make an argument either way. And that's where, the teacher doesn't have all the answers. I feel like ending like by saying like, and I reached for her swollen name, like that's this image of longing. He's longing, he's reaching for her. I mean, we're not confirmed that it's even a he, but the person is reaching for Mary. And I feel like the fact that that was what the author left with, and like the preoccupation that the narrator has with Mary the whole way along, I'm like, crush, fully formed crush. This is all about a crush. And I've had other students argue equally well that there's nothing seemingly romantic about this, that it's all about rebellion, and maybe like it's more of an admiration that Mary is like the tough one who's like willing to actually commit and get this tattoo, and that the narrator is not like, they are adventurous enough to like have a cigarette, sneak into the city at 14, but not adventurous enough to go ahead and get the tattoo. And honestly, it all comes down to what you can justify in the text. And I think you can justify both of these. We're not saying like Mary is Batman. That's what my thesis is. Mary is Batman. I would say, okay, if you think that Mary is Batman in this poem, how do you defend that? Like, is there a bat signal? You have to be able to have evidence to defend it. So something like that, sorry, it would take a lot of convincing to get me to believe that Mary's Batman. So hopefully you can put that one aside. But again, I think that you could argue it's romantic. It's not romantic. Either way, there's enough evidence to justify it. So we have to accept non-closure, which is a terrible feeling, I know, but it is what it is. Time and setting in this one, I think we could argue, right, that it's maybe present day. You know, if there's traffic, we know that there's cars that were invented. In this poem, it's not super critical, but in other poems, the time period does make a difference. One of the poems that you will get the option of choosing to kind of explicate on your own is Theme for English B by Langston Hughes. And you can't really understand that poem without understanding the setting. He's growing up in New York City, you know, as going to college as a Black man surrounded by mostly like white teachers and white peers. So like in that sense, the timing does matter. For this one, it's present day, you know, since we're coming at it, you know, contemporaries ourselves, it feels very familiar to us. So the symbol thing, I don't know. I think so. There's two types of symbols that hopefully you understood after you went through that packet. So there are situational symbols, and then there are universal symbols. So like a universal symbol, right, would be something like the Star of David or a cross that like we see a lot of people wear as jewelry. Like for everyone, right, the Star of David represents like, you know, the Jewish faith. The cross represents a Christian faith. Things like the American flag, right? Like wherever you see them, they sort of have the same representation. But certain poems can take things that don't have that universal meaning and give them meaning in the poem. Now, do I think there really are any like symbols in this poem? I don't know. What you'll see on your screen now is what some of my students have thought in the past. They thought that like just the mention of the Newports and the tattoo hinted at rebellion. And while rebellion is a universal theme, I don't know if there's necessarily like a universal symbol of rebellion. There's like the anarchy symbol, but I don't think that that's the same thing. So someone also, these were again two other ones, handing the sky over tonight. You know, this idea of handing childhood over to adulthood, maybe. You know, when the adult makes them pay another $10 for Mary's tattoo because they're underage, you know, it talks about like rebellion maybe not being something that you necessarily grow out of. In my opinion, these are all kind of like situational symbols. I think that they're important in understanding the poem. I would debate whether or not they're just advancing the poem or if they act as a symbol. But regardless, you for sure want to know on the universal symbols whenever they come up in poems, because the author is including them to bring in that greater meaning that they carry. In this, I don't think there's that going on. The form, again, it was just like free form. So the ideas in the theme, I would say that like this poem, so a theme typically, I'm going to actually put theme and I'm going to add motif in here because I think this is just a very coming of age kind of poem, like, you know, where you're crossing over from being a kid into adult and growing up and what that is about. I think that that's a strong repeated idea. To technically be a theme, it should be debatable, right? Like where you're saying like coming of age is negative because you make a lot of mistakes. So you could argue that that is a theme of this, although I would say that like the rebellious activities that the two 14-year-olds are doing, like the poem doesn't really like make it as like this is terrible. They ended with an awful fate, you know, she got a tattoo infection and they got stranded on a train. Like there's nothing like that in the poem. So I would not say that this poem thematically has like this hard hitting meaning about rebellion being either good or bad. It's more about motifs of what it's like to come of age or what it's like to straddle the world of being an adult and being a kid. And I think it does that in a really beautiful way. But in terms of like trying to convince you of an argument, I don't know if the poem really does that, except to maybe point out that, you know, growing up is beautiful, even when we are simple and we make mistakes, and when we challenge boundaries. So that would be like perhaps an idea that you could come away with. In terms of the other, I mean, again, like this is a pretty straightforward poem, but I hope that, where is it? Too many tabs open. Tabs for days, you guys. I'm hoping that when you used the article, and that article, sorry, I probably just gave you whiplash going back and forth through all those tabs. I'm hoping that the article that was linked under this blank note reading in Canvas, where it kind of walks you through, like when you're analyzing the title, do this. When you're analyzing this, do this. Hopefully that was helpful to you. So for this next activity, you're going to see posted in Canvas a list of a variety of poems that I would like you to choose one of them and work with either one other person or two other people, so no more than 3 people at once, and just kind of go through and identify those key points. And then I have a slide deck that I'd like you to include that information in and then share out with each other. So I'll kind of, again, it's Sunday night when I'm recording this. This was not how I expected this week and next week to go. Not ideal, not great. So I'm going to just kind of see how things go. Word on the street is that like maybe you guys could have a consistent sub. And when I find that out, that may change how I have you kind of do this kind of poetry analysis. But I feel like I want us to do some analysis, get a few under our belt so that you're ready to write something a little bit more serious, because the next thing that we're going to do after we read a few poems is turn you loose on writing one. So again, sorry, this is not ideal for any of us, but I don't want to die because I have an infected gallbladder. So here we are. Thank you so much for understanding. I miss you guys. I sincerely do. And I hope that everything goes well. And I will talk to you soon, and I'll hopefully be back really soon. Okay. Bye, everybody.